beneath the threshing moon. The wind had teeth that night. It hissed across the dry hills like an old curse half-remembered, lifting ash and memory in equal measure. Beneath the threshing moon, where silver light danced across the ruins of the vineyard, a man knelt in the dust, fingers clawed into the earth as if seeking something buried. His name was Dareth, and the demons knew it well. Each night they returned, not with flame nor fang, nor with the roiling skin of the abyss, but with voices, calm, cold, familiar. You should have let her die. You were never meant to be more than what your father made you. Every kindness you give is a debt you cannot repay. Dareth bore no sword at his side, no sigils carved toward the damned. His armor was silence, his weapon endurance. By day he walked among men, a healer in the outskirts of Falwen, mending broken limbs, lifting burdens too heavy for the young or the sick. They called him kind, steady, saintly even. But the villagers did not see the way his hands shook when he stitched flesh, or how he paused before lighting the lantern each dusk, as though afraid of what its glow might invite. For every kindness he gave, the voices grew louder. For every life he saved, a memory clawed its way back to the surface. He remembered the fire. He remembered the sound of screaming and the smell of hair burning. He remembered choosing which door to open first and whom to leave behind. The demons were not strangers to him. They bore his face. One night, when the moon hung low and ruddy over the hills, the eldest of the voices came. It had no name, or perhaps it had too many. It spoke not in accusation, but in invitation. "Lay down your guilt, Dareth," it purred, seated atop a boulder like a king of bones. "You have carried it long enough. Let me bear it for you." But Dareth only stood, eyes hollow from years of sleeplessness. His voice cracked like old wood. "If I give it to you, I forget what made me human." The demon smiled, black eyes gleaming. "What has guilt bought you? What has suffering earned?" "Atonement," Dareth whispered, "perhaps not in the eyes of the gods, but in my own." And then he did what he had done every night for 12 years. He turned his back to the voice. He walked into the dark, shoulders straight. No one saw the battles, no songs were sung. But those who lived near Falwen spoke of a man whose eyes held storms, whose laughter came seldom but was soft and clean when it did. They said he knew pain like an old friend and treated the pain of others with the reverence of a priest. They did not know that each act of mercy was a stone laid atop a grave no one else could see, and that each night, beneath the threshing moon, the demons returned. But Dareth still stood. Yet on the 13th year, the moon failed to rise. Dareth stood alone upon the hill, lantern unlit, the ruins below silent as bone. The wind did not move. The air was heavy with portent. And when the voice came, it was not as before. It did not echo or mock. It came as breath upon his neck. "She is here." Dareth turned, and there she stood. No longer the child he had failed, but something older, wrapped in the shape of sorrow. Her eyes, once green, were veiled in pale light. "You never came back," she said, voice distant as starlight. "You promised." He fell to his knees. "I tried. I opened the wrong door. I tried." "You saved others," she said, not accusing, not kind, a truth simply spoken. He bowed his head. The earth beneath him trembled. "Then let me save you," she said, and reached forth with both hands. In her touch, no fire, no punishment. Only weight, the weight he had carried, mirrored in her own. And Dareth for the first time wept. The demons did not speak that night. They watched, silent, as brother and sister sat beneath the sky that would not rise. And when dawn came, pale and grey, Dareth walked back to Forwen with no voices at his heels, only the wind, and the scent of smoke long gone. But silence, like debt, is rarely eternal. It was on the eve of the harvest that the wind changed, not in chill or weight, but in tone. The air grew thick with the iron-sweet scent of blood not yet spilled, and in the shadow of the western hills, something moved where no thing should be. A child vanished from the village. Her name was Eileen, barely 7 winters old, eyes like frost-bitten cornflower, and a smile that had once made Dareth remember the sister he had lost. The villagers came to him in grief and dread. They knew no gods here, only the healer who bore his pain like a yoke of stone. She walked toward the ruined vineyard, whispered the mother, hollow-eyed. She said she heard singing. Dareth said nothing, but his hands, though calm, trembled. The voices had returned, not as torment now, but warning. They spoke not in judgment, but hunger. And this time, they did not bear his face. They wore hers. Lantern in hand, Dareth stepped beyond the tilled fields into the old paths, where vines strangled the bones of once fruitful rows and brambles whispered of ancient sins. The moon, coy and veiled, peered weakly through a broken sky. Each footstep was an oath. He found her at the altar stone, not afraid, not bound, singing. Her voice was too old for her throat. The air around her shimmered, not with heat, but memory. 1,000 sorrows whispered through the leaves, and in their murmur, Dareth heard the truth. This was not possession. This was invitation. The sorrow he had carried, year upon year, had left its mark, not just on himself, but on the land, on the bones beneath it, on the minds too young to defend themselves. He had caged his demons, yes, but cages, left long enough, rust. "Eileen," he said gently. She turned to him and smiled with lips not her own. "You brought her back," the voice said through her mouth. "Now bring the rest." Dareth stepped forward and unsheathed the scalpel he never wished to wield again. "Then let it be me," he said, voice like flint striking steel. "Let them come through me." But she walks free. The wind howled, the vines writhed, and beneath the threshing moon at last returned. The man who had faced his demons met them with fire, not in hand, but in heart. The air split, not with light, but with sound, a ringing like iron on hollow bone, drawn out into the marrow of the world. Eileen collapsed, breathless but unharmed, her small body cradled by the weeping vines as if in apology. The thing that had spoken through her now uncoiled, slow as hunger, from the earth beneath the altar stone. It was no beast, no spirit of claw and ash. It was form made from sorrow, shaped like Dareth's shame, robed in old fire and ash-stained linen, a face like his mother's, a gait like the captain he had failed to follow. It did not speak, not with words, it only looked, and the look was worse. Dareth dropped the scalpel. "I know you," he said. "You are every door I never opened, every breath I took after theirs had stilled." Still the figure approached, one foot dragging slightly, as if it carried a weight it had never asked to bear. Behind Dareth, Eileen stirred, a whimper, a breath, a heartbeat. "Do you wish to be free of me?" the presence seemed to whisper, though no mouth moved. Dareth shook his head. "No, I wish to face you." At that, the thing stilled. The silence was complete. Even the vines dared not rustle. Dareth bent and took Eileen in his arms. She did not flinch. Whatever shadow had touched her was broken now, or, more terribly, shared. He turned to the spectre. "I cannot bury you, I cannot flee you, but I will not feed you." The demon lifted a hand, 5 fingers like smoke trailing toward him, and halted. It was not dismissed. It was regarded. "You have remembered," it said. And for the first time, there was something like weariness in its form. "I must," Dareth answered. "For her, for them, for myself." The figure nodded once. And then it sank, not fled, not banished, but settled into the soil, like seed into loam. The wind exhaled. The moon, no longer hidden, shone clean and white across the altar stone. Dareth staggered back toward the village, child in arms. The old vineyard behind him breathed its first peace in decades. But peace is not permanence, and remembrance is a labor without end. That winter was the longest in memory. Snow clung to the fields like silence after grief, and ice hung heavy from the eaves of every roof in Falwen. Yet no child vanished, no voices whispered in sleep. The villagers began to sing again, quiet songs, but true. And Dareth worked. He mended roofs. He carved toys. He buried the bones that should have been buried long ago. Every night he lit the lantern. Every night he listened. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes a voice, one he had not heard before. A stranger's regret. A name unspoken. A cry. He did not ignore them. He wrote them down. He carved their names into the low stones behind his home, each one marked with a simple line and a flower when spring returned, not because he sought forgiveness, but because the forgotten deserved to be remembered. And so the years turned, and the healer of Falwen became an old man, slower of hand, firmer of voice. The children who had once feared the shadow in his eyes now called him Grandfather Dareth, and the parents who had once wept upon his doorstep now sat beside him on festival days, sharing meat and mead and laughter. Yet always, beneath the joy, a hush remained, for they remembered. They remembered the night the moon failed to rise. They remembered the harvest when the vines whispered. They remembered a man who bore demons not to destroy them, but to make peace with them. And each year, when the moon rose full and silver above the hills, they lit lanterns across the vineyard, not to banish the dark, but to honor those who walked within it. The wind's voice had changed. It no longer carried the weight of curses, but the questions of the dead. And in the growing silence of the valley, the soil itself began to speak, not in words, but in signs. Seeds sprouted where fire once raged. Moss grew soft over the altar stone. Owls returned to the rafters of abandoned barns. The land remembered what it had been, and in its remembering, it began to heal. But healing is not forgetting. One day, a traveler came. Not young, not old, cloaked in a dust-colored mantle and bearing a staff made of bone wood. He asked for Dareth by name. Not title, not trade, name only. Dareth met him beneath the eaves of the old healer's hall, where ivy curled like green script across the stones. "You have walked far," Dareth said. His voice was deep now, softer with age, but steady as the mountains that framed the valley. The traveler nodded. "Farther than I knew when I began. You bear more than I expected." Dareth did not smile. "If you have come to speak of demons, speak." "Not demons," the traveler said. "Echoes. The ones that do not fade. The ones bound not by place, but by deed." And at that, Dareth's brow creased, not in fear, but in the slow recognition of a truth long known, long avoided. "Come," he said, "you will eat." That night, they sat before the fire in silence until the stars rose. Then the traveler unfolded a map, not of lands, but of names. Places marked not by mountains or rivers, but by wounds, by stories unfinished. "Others are waking," he said. "Places like Falwen. Worse, some, hungrier. Old pain stirs where it was never faced." Dareth stared into the flames. "I am old," he said. "You are needed," the traveler replied. For a long time, the fire was the only sound. Then Dareth stood, slower than he once had, but not bowed. "I do not seek redemption," he said. "You carry it," the traveler answered. "Now help others lift their share." The next day they departed, not with fanfare nor with promise, only a satchel of herbs, a blade that had not drawn blood in decades, and the small stone from the vineyard altar wrapped in linen. Before he left, Dareth knelt before the carved names behind his home, fingers pressed to the earth. "I walk for you," he murmured, "for what you lost and what I still might mend." The village watched him go, not with sorrow, but solemn pride. They had no doubt he would return, though they did not know when or what shape the man would bear when next the threshing moon rose. And so the old healer walked into the waking world, toward the places where memory festered, toward sorrow unspoken and graves unmarked, toward fire yet to come. The road bent westward, where the trees leaned as though listening. The traveler, whose name Dareth had not asked, nor had it been offered, walked ahead, never far, never close, like a memory that hovered just beyond reach. They passed through hamlets lost to time, hearths cold, doors unbarred, places where silence had long since grown roots. At dusk on the seventh day, they came upon the village of Brellan. It lay in a hollowed vale, surrounded by yew groves and the remnants of a once grand watchtower. Smoke still curled from chimneys. Bread still rose in ovens. But the people moved with eyes downcast and steps too careful, as if every gesture might wake something beneath the soil. Children did not laugh here. Dogs did not bark. Even the birds had left. Dareth felt the weight the moment he crossed the threshold. A hush like breath held too long. "They fear the bell," the traveler said. "It rang once, 5 years ago, in the hour before dawn. No one had pulled it." Dareth frowned. What followed? The river turned bitter. The cattle gave birth to stillborn twins, and the bones of a child were found in the foundation of the mill. No fear flickered in Dareth's gaze, only a solemn nod. "Take me to the bell." The tower rose at the village's edge. Its stones were scorched, not by fire but by time. Ivy dared not touch it. Birds would not nest in its crown. The bell itself, blackened and veined with green patina, hung like a sentence never spoken. Dareth climbed alone. Each step creaked, though no rot marred the stair. It was not decay, it was memory, straining with each footfall. At the top he stood beneath the bell and looked upon the village it watched. He laid a hand upon the metal. It was cold, but not lifeless. Then he closed his eyes and listened. 1,000 voices surged at once, whispers, cries, laughter turned to screams. Not demons, not spirits, guilt, layered and sealed into the heart of the village. An old rite, Dareth realized, an offering to some forgotten god of plenty, one that demanded innocence in return for harvest. The bell had been its mouthpiece. He opened his eyes. "There is still blood beneath the mill," he murmured. The traveler below raised his head. Then it must be named. Dareth descended. That night he gathered the elders. He did not accuse. He asked. And slowly, with reluctance that grew to weeping, they told the truth. In a year of famine, they had returned to the old ways. Just once. Just long enough to survive. And then silence had become tradition. Their children had forgotten, but the land had not. Dareth went to the mill and struck the earth with his staff. He called the names of the child whose bones had been used to shore the stones, names the villagers had long buried. The ground did not tremble, the air did not scream, but the bell fell, split clean in two, and the silence of Brellan lifted like a fog. The next morning, the birds returned. "Not every place will answer so gently," the traveler said as they departed. "I know," Dareth replied. But even a poisoned land can remember how to breathe. And so they continued, toward the places where the old gods still whispered, where offerings had been made in shadow, and where men, like Dareth, must choose whether to forget or to face what they had once given in fear. The path narrowed into stone and pine, where wild goats watched from ledges, and the wind sang thin across the cliffs. Days passed in silence, save for the brief exchanges between the traveler and Dareth. They spoke like smith and anvil, sparingly, yet always toward purpose. On the 14th night, they came to a monastery, or what had once been one. Its walls were broken, its gate long unbarred. Statues of saints and forgotten guardians lay shattered, their faces weather-worn or deliberately struck. Yet the inner cloister stood untouched, vines growing gently along its edges as if in quiet defiance. Here, the air was different, thick not with evil, but with grief so deep it had ceased to weep. They entered without ceremony. The traveler bowed to no altar, and Dareth's gaze did not linger on the sigils carved above the door. They called it Soul Hollow, the traveler said, once a place of healing, now a tomb of silence. Dareth nodded. The silence here does not fear. It mourns. They found the abbot's journal buried beneath dust and beeswax, tucked behind the altar's rotting cloth. The pages told of plague, of a town that begged for aid, and a brotherhood that shut its gates. We prayed, one line read. And when prayer failed, we closed our ears. They had survived while others died, and in that choice, their sanctity turned to stone. Dareth lit a single candle. He read aloud the names of the townsfolk who had died beyond the gate, then the names of the monks. And then he knelt, as if to pray, though he prayed to no god. He prayed to the memory itself. That night the wind changed, not stronger nor colder, only present. It moved through the cloister and stirred the ashes of long-dead incense. At dawn, moss grew between the chapel stones where none had taken root in decades. The traveler turned to him. You mourned for them, even those who failed. I must, Dareth said, for one day others will mourn for me. Weeks became seasons. The pair wandered north to the Iron Fen marshes, where an entire village had disappeared without fire or scream. Westward to a coastal fortress where children dreamed of teeth in the water. South to the salt valleys where men had buried not their dead, but their living, under orders of kings long turned to dust. And in each place, Dareth named the forgotten, faced the weight of deeds done in fear. He never offered forgiveness, only witness. Some places yielded peace, others offered fury. One, a mountain village of slate and shadow, cursed them both to wander blind. They stayed until the curse faded. They always stayed. And as they moved, the stories of the old healer spread, not as a man who cured illness, but as one who listened where others would not. It was in the red-wound valley that the path turned from sorrow to reckoning. The land there bore no grass, no trees, only stone cracked and blackened, where once an orchard stretched for miles. Nothing grew, and no beasts passed through. Even the wind veered wide around it, as if afraid. The traveler paused upon its rim. We have reached the place, he said. Dareth narrowed his eyes. This is not a place. It is a scar. The traveler nodded. One you left. And at that, the silence grew tall between them. Dareth said nothing for a long while. Then he stepped forward. I know this place. I had hoped it had forgotten me. He descended alone. Each step unearthed memory, howling, searing, bone-deep memory. The screams of a town accused of heresy. The fires lit not by zealots but by men he had once called brothers. He had watched. He had obeyed. He had told himself it was duty. He had buried that truth deeper than any grave. Now the earth unearthed it. The center of the valley still bore the remnants of the pyre's charred stakes, melted iron, and bones brittle as chalk. Dareth knelt as he always did. But this time, the voices came not in whisper, but in roar. You watched, you knew, you lit the fire. The wind surged, and the air thickened with ash that had not been there moments before. Shadows writhed between the stakes, no longer echoes of pain, but beings formed of it, not demons. Judges. They wore the faces of the dead, a child with no eyes, a woman with arms raised not in plea but in curse, a man who had died silent and now screamed. The traveler did not follow Dareth into the center. This he knew Dareth must do alone. The figures circled. Each step they took seared footprints into the dust. Their mouths moved without breath, without life, and yet their words rang like verdicts. You stood among the watchers, you held the torch. Dareth did not argue, he did not cry, he rose. I did, and I will carry your names until the end of my breath. He stepped forward into their ring. Strike me if you must, but let your pain be heard. The flames surged, a wall of heat, of memory, of truth. And Dareth did not burn. The fire bent around him, not in mercy, but in recognition. He opened his arms. I will not run, I will not forget. I am what you call me, but I am more than what I was. One by one, the figures touched his skin. And each time he flinched, not in pain, but in grief. When the last hand fell away, the valley sighed. The wind returned, cool, clean. And the traveler came to his side. You have faced it. No, Dareth said, voice hoarse. I have begun to face it. He took from his satchel the old stone from the vineyard altar. He placed it at the valley's heart, and where it lay, grass dared to rise. That night, the moon rose red. Not from curse, but from witness, and in its light Dareth slept, not dreamless, but at peace. But peace, like seed, must first break open before it roots. At dawn he rose and found the traveler waiting beside the altar stone, the newly sprouted grass trembling underfoot. The man's expression was changed, no longer that of a guide, but of one who had waited long for judgment. I must leave you, the traveler said. There is a gate ahead I cannot pass. Dareth studied him then truly, as if seeing the shape beneath the cloak for the first time. There was no age to the traveler, nor youth, only memory held in flesh. Who are you? Dareth asked, though part of him already knew. The traveler bowed his head. I am the question you never asked aloud. And then he turned and vanished like mist between stones. Dareth stood alone. The valley lay quiet, no longer mourning, no longer silent. Behind him were towns reclaimed, griefs buried properly, names remembered. Before him, only a narrow path winding through a cleft in the hills, veiled in broom and old dread. He walked. The passage narrowed into stone. He walked. The light faded to gray. He walked. And then he reached it, a gate wrought of rust and bone, set in a wall that had no craftsman. No sigil marked its face, no script declared its purpose. But Dareth knew it. It was the place where all things lost waited. The place he had never dared to return. The true heart of the vineyard. He pressed a hand to the gate. It did not open. It asked. It asked not for forgiveness nor penance. It asked only, why did you not speak then, when it would have mattered? And Dareth answered, because I was afraid. Because I believed obedience would protect what little good remained in me. Because I did not trust that grief could lead to strength. The gate did not creak. It did not groan. It vanished like guilt undone by truth. Beyond it, a circle of stones, and in its center, the spirit of his sister, not as shade or revenant, but as she had been before the fire, Oh, curious, fierce. You came late, she said, not with scorn, with sorrow. I did, he said, and I will carry that truth longer than life. She stepped forward. Then I forgive you. But only if you name the rest. Dareth's knees buckled, but he caught himself. I will, I swear it. Every name, every silence, every door unopened. She placed a hand upon his brow. And with that touch, memory came, not just his, but all the cries that had never found ears. They poured into him. Sorrow, rage, longing, regret. It would have broken him once. But now he bore it. He wept. And in the weeping he remembered, not for himself, but for them. When the tears ceased, Dareth stood not as a man washed clean, but as one weathered true. His sister's hand left his brow, and the weight of memory remained, not as burden, but as bond. She looked at him with eyes like spring rain. They will come, she said softly, others, with their own reckonings, their own gates. I will guide them, he replied. If not in body, then in word. If not in word, then in the stones I leave behind. She nodded. Then my part is done. And with a final breath, not a vanishing but a returning, she faded into the stillness. Dareth stood alone once more, but he no longer felt alone. He emerged from the hills to find the season had turned. Leaves danced gold upon the wind, and the lanterns of Falwen burned again, not in fear, but remembrance. He did not seek the healer's hall. He walked to the vineyard, to the altar stone, now mossed and whole. And there, beneath the threshing moon, he carved one final name, Dareth of the Gates, and below it he bore the weight of silence and returned it to song. He did not die that night, nor the night after. But when his time came, they say it came not with pain, but with a hand on his shoulder, warm, familiar, and the sound of a gate opening quietly in the distance. No bells rang, no miracles bloomed. But for 3 days, the wind in the vineyard sang of peace, and on the 4th, the children of Falwen found a journal bound in ashwood and stitched with red thread. It held no miracles, only names, thousands of names. And in the margins, words in a steady hand. If you would remember them, speak them aloud. And if you cannot listen. So the story passed from firelight to firelight, from dusk to dusk, not in triumph, but in truth, not of a man who defeated demons, but of one who heard them, and stayed. The end.